In the midst of ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, Ohio University students are doing something about it. Eden Al-Masoude, a graduate student studying African history, helped start an organization on campus last fall called Students for Justice in Palestine. She tells her story.
My mother's American, and my father is Rifian, Moroccan. And my mother actually was born in Japan and spent a lot of her childhood there. And my father grew up in the Rif, and I believe he spent some time in Spain and France as well. And then he and my mother came to the U.S. after he was imprisoned for political issues, for activism. So I was born in the U.S., but then because of their experiences, I have, I think, a very international background growing up. And then I've also spent some time in Latin America. I've been to Ecuador 3 times to do biomedical research on Chagas disease. I actually grew up here in Athens, so I've been here for quite a while. And I started college very young. I was 15 actually when I started, and so that had a big contributing factor to why I stayed here as opposed to going somewhere else. But then when it comes to my master's program, I decided to stay here because our program just happens to be one of the best African studies programs, and so I figured I'm already here, I might as well stay and have this opportunity to do African studies at a fantastic place to do it. I think that as I've gotten older throughout my time in college and now in graduate school, I've really become a lot more aware. And so I realized that the repression of the Amazigh people in Morocco has really determined a lot of my life, even though I grew up kind of separate from that in the U.S. And that really led me to be pretty militant and now really develop an activism for Amazigh rights issues in the diaspora as well as in North Africa. And then I've gotten involved in a lot of other social justice sorts of issues, which is how Students for Justice in Palestine sort of came about. So it's interesting the way that Amazigh issues and Palestinian issues relate, because our colonizers right now and our oppressors right now are Arab, and Palestinians are, of course, Arab. And so for that reason, a lot of Amazigh actually support Israel, because also there are a lot of Jews in our ethnic group, and a lot of them went to Israel, so there's a sort of sense of solidarity. But the way I see it, it's not a matter of ethnic solidarity, and it's not a matter of Arab nationalism, but it's just an issue of human rights. And the fact that Palestinians are Arab and my oppressors are Arab as well, I don't think matters, because I think that just the numbers of the killing ratios in the conflict in Israel and Palestine are so dramatic that it makes it really obvious which side I should be on if I have to be on a side. So I guess it was really the numbers that made me an activist in support of Palestine, when I realized how much miseducation there was, and how the media portrays the conflict in the U.S. is really problematic. And then also seeing those issues within my ethnic group where people take their biases so far as to work to oppress another people just because we've suffered oppression as well. I hope that students really get a sense of Palestinian culture. I guess we want to humanize Palestinians, because I feel that in talking about the conflict, especially as Americans in the group, we don't want to just portray Palestinians as victims and just as passive players in this whole conflict, but as human beings who have feelings and who like to dance and who like to eat good food and who like all of the same kinds of things that the rest of us like.
SJP held their first major event on Saturday called Land with a People, a Land with a Culture. The program featured Palestinian food, dancers, and speakers who testified about the harshness and brutality of life, but also its richness. Jana El Akras, a Palestinian student at Ohio State University, shares her passion for her people and culture.
It's just so important because the Palestinian story, the Palestinian struggle, the plight of the refugee is is something that has been happening and it's a story that has been retold throughout history. It's happened to the Somalis, it's happened to the Afghanis, it's happened to the Laotians, it's happened to everybody. And the Palestinians, honestly, I think we embody struggle. For over 60 years, the things that have happened to the Palestinian people, they're numerous, they're hurtful, and they're hard to talk about sometimes. So what we try to do as the Art of Freedom is to make it more accessible. We like to let people see, we have a culture. We have beautiful things about our culture. We have a dance that no one can touch. No one can change our dance from us. We have food that's amazing, and I'm sure you know that from eating it. And we have a story, and you should listen to our story.
Mazen Razul shares his experience growing up in Palestine.
Between 2000 and 2003, 2004, that was the hardest and most difficult period that we lived through. Once the Intifada started, the Israelis, or the Israeli military, closed that entrance and blocked it completely. No one was allowed to use the entrance anymore. People had to travel hours in order to go to get to their homes, to their jobs, their schools, and everything. I was young back then. I was 12, 13 years old. So we lived right there, right on the street. So I used to go down there and sit on the street with my mother, with my grandmother, actually. After a couple of weeks, that kept on happening. So my grandmother figured out that she also had to do something in this fight for freedom. So she started to go every Friday, put a table on the street in front of her house, put water, put fruits, whatever she had picked from her garden, and drinks and ice, and put it on the table. And the young men and women would go, protest, demonstrate, and come back to her, drink some water, take a breath, then go back. After an hour or two of the demonstration, always the Israeli tanks that were parked on the street and blocking the street, you always started to shoot on the demonstrators. Started to shoot on them, throw gas bombs on them, and then the guys would respond to that with rocks.
SJP is an organization on campus that is dedicated to promote justice, human rights, liberation, and self-determination for the Palestinian people. To get involved with SJP, email ohiou.jp@gmail.com. For Journalism 314, I'm Taylor Poole.